Yes. Well, the landscape project. A little bit of history is that this word was thought of in the Netherlands already in 2014, and we received some money from the Amsterdam City Swim to get this project done. And then in the beginning of 2019, we got in contact with the Alliance. So instead of being at a Dutch review, we thought it would be a better way to have an international view on this. And the goal would mean that we want to have a look around the world in a sort of a landscape, what things are going on. And then maybe in the far future, we can also have like an advice in what roads could or would lead to Rome. Um, so one of the strategic goals is to promote from us is of course the scientific research on the global scale, because I don't know if you feel the same as I do, but we're not looking for a solution in Holland. I always say we're looking for a solution somewhere in the world. I couldn't care less if it's going to be China, Chile, or Argentina. So in doing so, the associations would benefit. So it's not only for one country. We want to have this for all the members in place. And that's why we are so happy that we took it up, the three of us, with a lot of help, of course. Therefore, and we also have, of course, the landscape was a strategic fund allocation. We had a very nice meeting in Tours, strategic review, and one of the things that we wanted to do is the landscape project. The outcome of this project will be shared with all associations, which are a member, of course, and well, it was sponsored by us, that's not important. So here you can see the organization that we took up, and you see there is, the project is managed by the steering committee, and we were all three up in the committee. We were very thrilled about the steering committee, the sounding board, because of course we do this for the Patient and Care Advisory Council, the PCAC, if I'm right, Sarah, and of course with the help of the Scientific Advisory Council, which I'm very fond, David, that you as a chairman are here today, and even Gathin is here, and so we really appreciated your help, because this is really an area which is not easy for people like me who are fundraisers. There was a project team, and Han van Kasteren is a Dutch guy, and he was helped by two other people from his office. And then we had a extended steering committee, because we really wanted to be this a worldwide scope. So it's not going to be okay in Greece, this is what we think, and that is what we're going to show the world. Now, what we really wanted to have is a global view on what things were going on and in what kind of direction we think things should go. So we had a lot of meetings on the phone, each every 2 weeks. We were on the phone, the three of us, with Han, and finally we have the result that we want to present to you. Is this still me? Yes. So we had 5 objectives of the project. First, to create an insight on current ALS research around the world. Second one, to create an overview of trends in academic focus areas, breakthrough findings and impact, key opinion leader opinions, and recent publications. Then clarify expectation of key stakeholders on the focus of the impact of the allocated funds. And we had a lot of objectives, I can tell you, and we couldn't reach them all at the moment, but we want to reach them, of course. Create alignment on the focus of the areas, and as last, create a decision-making template that people, or excuse me, members could use. So we're not going to tell everybody what to do. We wanted to have an oversight of the things that we think are going around, so people that are investing in research could make a better choice where to invest in. Yeah, then within the available time for this project, the main focus has been insight on the current ALS research activities to build the landscape picture. Collect a lot of information from PubMed, identify the type of research, and then log the other institution and geographically. And not everything came out until this moment yet. So categorize all studies to map who is doing what and where, and last, to create several cross sections and find correlations to build the landscape. So this PubMed was the basis where we worked on. I don't know if we achieved all goals, as I already told you, because when we got in there were so many things that we were looking at or could look at that we had to focus. And let me turn this screen a little bit like this. So what we think we have right now is not the landscape, but is a process that we can use to have an ongoing landscape. Because this is a picture, and Calaneet and Kathy are going to show you from PubMed publications from the beginning of 2018 until mid-2019. And there, you will see in what direction there has been articles in PubMed. So still a lot of work to do, but at the end you see the machine learning model. That would be the future part, in my opinion. So if it will work out, that we can see what will go on in the future. We had a list of a lot of people around the world, to key opinion leaders that we wanted to talk with, to ask, okay, what do you think are the things that are going on? But we had to stop at a certain point, because instead of having all talks with these people, we decided to have a better look into the PubMed situation. But we did talk to David Taylor, Leonard Vandenberg, Jaap Kerschen, Dr. Niels Schneider, Wouter Jansen, and also two patients, Vincent Cornelissen from ALS Patient Connected, and of course Gorrit-Jan, who is representative of the board of directors, but also of course as a patient and carer. And the key finding since the research articles analyzed was key focus, further interviews at that moment were not taken off. So before asking what happened in 2009, we don't know yet. So if you skip the 2009, you will see the graph of the articles that has been in there. So there were, and there's 1.5 year, 31,000 of motor neuronic disease, and then ALS, and on both of them. So those articles are taking into account to the picture that we will show you from where the most of the articles write about. And you can see there's a steady growth in publication on ALS MND, which of course is sort of the same, but MND is a bit broader, so that we'll focus on ALS and MND. That's your up. You're up, Kathy, because Kathy took the most of the work.
Not really. It was definitely a team effort. That's not true. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology and what we did through the research study, and it changed a lot. As Gorrit-Jan said, we started out with one set of objectives. We narrowed them down. We put some stuff out of scope because it was quite a big project. And so this is a different way to look at the articles that we just had up in the bar graph. And when we first did the methodology, and I'm going to show you some slides about that later, we were specifically looking at ALS, and we didn't include the search MND. So then we did a further analysis to make sure that we were inclusive when we were looking at the articles and categorizing them. So you can see that there's a huge overlap of 19,571 articles when we looked at the total of 31,700. But we did do, if you think of the ALS as the left bracket and MND as the right bracket on the overlap, we made sure that we looked just exclusively at the left bracket and the right bracket as well as the overlap to see if there were any differences. So just to be clear, we ended up looking at 2,100 articles related to cure over the last 1.5 years, from 2018 to 2019. And one of the things on the slide that Gorrit-Jan presented about the structure of what we were doing at the very bottom, you might have noticed that there were 4 students as well. And what we did is we had students who had a scientific background look at the articles and categorize them. And we're going to talk about the categories, but there was a high degree of confidence in the way that they categorized them, and that's why we had 4 different people do it to make sure that they were analyzing them in the right way. Whoops, I went backwards. So these are the categories that were defined. There are 11 of them in total, and Dr. Taylor and the others that were mentioned at the beginning had a lot of say in how these categories would work out. And then once we started to analyze the articles, you know, it was confirmed through the work of the students that this was a good way to break down. There's probably a million different ways we could categorize things. And so is it perfect? Maybe, maybe not, but it is a start on the journey of being able to look at where research is going and what research is being done. And as it says at the bottom, a key finding was there's never going to be an ideal. There never is going to be a perfect. And I'm fond of a saying that says we don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good, so we carried on with the categorization the way it was, and we think it worked out pretty well. Again, we originally used ALS as the search criteria from for the last year and a half. And you can see that 73% of the studied articles were a new identification and 27% were reviews of earlier work. And 27 articles were case reports, and 157 articles appeared to be off topic or unidentifiable. So as I said, we started out one way, and we moved a little bit in how we were doing the project. So this is just a little bit of the journey through how we changed the landscape project as we were going through. So one of the first things that Han's team did was look at frequency of keywords in titles and tags in articles. And we decided we couldn't do the analysis this way because there were certain words that appeared a lot in articles that were irrelevant to the data that we were trying to ascertain from this project, like mouse, for example. The word mouse is one of the most prevalent words. So there wasn't a lot of value add in being able to determine how many articles contained the word mouse. And so that's when we moved to the categorization piece. And that became more of a manual project at this point than an automated process. But the great thing about putting manual input into something that could be automated is that it makes that automation smarter in the long run. So all of the information that we gathered by doing the manual process with the students can now be learned to teach machines to do what they were doing. So this is the original word cloud that we looked at, and you can see that the prevalence of certain words made it difficult to categorize. And so, again, this is just a different landscape or a different view of what I just showed you with the word cloud, in that the words that scored high on keywords weren't as helpful to us. So, again, this is another example of why we didn't want to use just a data analyst to look at the words. So when you looked at 3 different articles on SOD1, when the students did it, it got categorized into, the 3 articles were categorized differently. And if we had just used the keywords, they would have all been lumped together. I'm going to turn it over to Calaneet to show you the results.
I can tell Kathy's a lot taller than I am. So first I wanted to say that the information that we're presenting today will be made available to the membership. I see a lot of people taking pictures, which is perfectly fine, but we'll also email this out to you so you don't have to remember it all because it's a lot of information. And actually there's a lot more that we will share with you, but it's not yet ready for today. So there's more to come. So first up here, you see the outcomes of the research that was predominantly focused on the cause of disease, or what we call a pathogenic understanding. So you see the red line, and it's way further out than some of the other areas that we looked at. And when we were on the phone with the extended steering committee, I remember Dr. Taylor and Dr. Schneider both saying, that doesn't surprise me, right? Is that my recollection, David? Yes. And you can see up at top, you start with clinical management of ALS, the 18%, which is that light blue line, and I know the font is quite small on the right side, is clinical understanding. And then you see a very small group, there's 2%, which is assistive technology. And that actually garnered a lot of conversation in our board meeting yesterday, recognizing right now there doesn't seem to be as much research happening, or at least publication of research in the last year and a half around assistive technology. We look at epidemiology. Clinical trials was 3% in that green. You see biomarkers was also quite small in 5%. This surprised me a lot because we know that in our community it's very important that we have a biomarker and have a biomarker understanding. So I think we need to dig into this a little bit more to get a better sense. And then we went into genetics at 8% in the purple line there. Laboratory, both the pink and the red are kind of combined together, and then case reports. And then there's this bottom line here, it says other unidentifiable topics, maybe not relevant or maybe not with the categories that we had just listed before. So, well, if I go back a second, this was around ALS, and when we took the same analysis, we looked at MND, you'll see the two different graphs here. They're very similar. What we recognized is regardless of whether somebody listed ALS or MND, the differences weren't that large. However, there were a couple things that did stand out to us. One is that assistive technology area actually dropped down to 0%. And we also noticed that again, that pathogenic understanding was a little bit lower in the MND area, not as large as in the ALS area. Again, maybe relevant, maybe not, we're not sure yet, but just to give you a sense of what we saw. We also noticed that in that bottom yellow bucket of we don't know, that grew by another 5%. So that's quite a bit given all of the different categories. That yellow line under MND is quite large, so that's 13%. So we would like to get a better sense of what is really in there that we're not clear about yet. So the other thing we wanted to look at was the correlation. And this table might look confusing, and that's why you'll get it later so you can take a closer look at it. But what it really shows you is where research was being done in one area, was there a strong correlation with another area? So where you see the dark green squares, so for example, in that first column, is there a laser here? Aha, yes. So in that first column here, you'll see assistive technology is at 61, lined up with clinical management. So this is a pretty high correlation of research happening at the same time or in the same area. And you can see that in the different areas of the charts here. And there's some areas where you see that there's very little or no correlation. So that might be something to think about as you look at what kind of research is happening either in your country or some of the research that you might be funding. Some of the key findings of this was that if you look down here, or I don't know if this reaches over here. Oh, it does. Look at that. Okay. Genetic and pathogenic understanding had a very high correlation. Clinical trials and clinical management, not surprising, had a high correlation. Biomarkers and clinical understanding, as well as therapeutic targets and pathogenic understanding. So what does this all mean? You know, what are we going to do with all this information? So some of the key insights that we've found so far is that much research is still really focused on that pathogenic understanding, meaning just trying to understand this disease, right? The other things that we call them runners-up were our therapeutic targeting and clinical understanding. And most articles had a very clear secondary focus, and you can see the list below, including genetic, pathogenic, clinical trial, clinical management, on and on. So now what? Next steps. One of the things before I go through this slide that I did want to let you know is we have started going through trying to understand where the research is happening. So taking all of this information, and you think of the thousands and thousands of articles in PubMed, and looking at all of the authors in each of those articles, which is a lot, and then trying to understand where those authors are located, and then some of the collaborations that are happening throughout the world. So that all of that information is still in a information machine trying to be sorted out. And once that machine has spit some magic out, I know, you're excited about this, aren't you, Gorrit-Jan? Yes. Once we spit that magic out through the magic machine that I don't understand, we will share that with you. But we don't have a clear understanding yet. We've started to get some, what I would call preliminary results. So next steps in really a recurring model. So you heard Gorrit-Jan speak a little bit about creating potentially an algorithm or something that would continue on into the future. So that would be one big thing we would like to be able to do, and to really create what I think is most important is kind of, actually my eyes aren't working, so it's down here, this future automated categorization. So we might see something on an annual basis where we could, as the Alliance, give you information more regularly to make informed decisions on your own. Next steps that we're looking at is that metadata, which I just talked about, the authors, dates, and institutes. And again, this information is only from 2018 and 19, even though you saw the 10-year fold out that started with Gorrit-Jan's slide. So we want to increase that as well. And we really want to collect funding data. So in my country, and one of my favorite lobbyists, which is a strange term, but it's true, she always says that payment drives practice, right? And we know money drives practice. So we want to understand, what is the funding data here, and how is that driving the research that's being done and the collaborations that are being done. And then, of course, we want to figure out if this is valuable. We spent a lot of time, as you can tell, and Gorrit-Jan said, many hours and conversations, and people in this room did as well. So we want to find out what is the most valuable information for you, our members, and then work on structures and methodologies that can help get you that information. I put this here. This is an appendix, very exciting, kidding, but I do think it's important because as you get this information and you're trying to look through what does this all mean, this was the categorization, that we used when we started to look at each of the studies that had been published, and I want to make sure that you have the definitions of how we looked at it when we were looking at the categorization. So this will be available to you as well. Okay? Great. Oh, Gorrit-Jan's got something to add. Go for it.
I want to add something. No, I'd like to thank, of course, all the people that helped us so far, especially David with the Scientific Advisory Council. But yesterday, Sarah, you as responsible in the board of directors for the PCAC, you shared this information with the PCAC. And could you please come over and tell what the PCAC committee or sounding board opinion was about what they saw, because that's what we're doing it for, and I was thrilled when you said what came out of it. It's going to be crowded up here.
It's going to be crowded. Good stuff.
All right, so I should be following Calaneet, not you, so that I can talk here. So what was shared with the PCAC was the original landscape presentation, though, so it has changed a little bit. I want to put that out there first. So what the first iteration, they were able to view the presentation, and there was a lot of very positive feedback as far as seeing what research was going on around the world. Many of you are probably aware, I work at a university, so it doesn't impact me as much, but a lot of this information is behind paywalls. So if you are a patient or a person living with ALS or a caregiver, you can't always see the research that's happening. So they were very impressed with the amount of research that's happening. They were very impressed with the scope of around the globe of where it was happening. And they did have a few questions, and I assume it's going to be answered as time goes on. They had some questions about the caregiving and the equipment piece and why that was so much lower. I actually have a question on that. I don't know if it's the right place, but I'll ask in a minute. So what else did I took a few notes. And they were also, because it didn't show up in the first one, but we talked about it in our meeting, is the collaboration that's going on. So the fact that people are working, it's not just one lab, but it's multiple labs working together. That was also very positive for them.
Thank you. Yeah. David, are you in there? Yeah, I know. You have to come up. And yeah, we want your vision until what the work has been up to now. What are your thoughts about it? Only 1 minute, by the way.
You have 1 minute to think about it.
So that's half a minute, and then... 10 seconds to think about coming up here. That's fine. Yeah, well, that's good.
So, hi everyone. So when first presented with this idea from Gorrit-Jan and from Calaneet and the Alliance, we've spoken with it at the SAC a number of times, and we'll talk about the SAC tomorrow. I think this is a good starting point. And I think it really is a starting point. And I think some of the really key things, like if I were just to riff off some of what I've seen so far, I think a lot of it can be put into certain context. I think before moving to the next step, it'll be really interesting to gather some individuals to say, okay, let's look at some of these pieces like the assisted technology. What ones aren't there because they don't mention ALS, but they're going to be applicable to ALS, and individuals writing those papers maybe aren't focused on ALS specifically, or biomarkers. How has it come from 10 years ago to now? That 5% might be really significant, or that 9%. So I think I'm very excited about the start, and I think that this is going to only grow, and it's going to expand to something that will be a very valuable tool, hopefully, for everybody who are funders, myself included, being someone who stewards that. So I'm excited about it. That's what you were looking for? I am very excited about it.
That's great. Thank you.
That's actually a perfect segue to how we're going to wrap up this session, what kind of questions do you have when you see this data? So we'll get to that in a minute. But I did want to just also share that in addition to the data that we've been working on with Han and the landscape project, we have reached out to a couple of different countries to look at how they're measuring impact and how they're looking at research. And so we've talked to two so far, and in one instance, Canada is the instance that they're looking at PubMed as well in a similar way, using citations though, as opposed to the way that we categorize things. But because we're using the same base of data, we can probably correlate the data at some point in the future to marry the citation data into what we've done with the landscape. So that's a future step. ALS in the United States has also done some impact studies specifically around the 5-year anniversary of the Ice Bucket Challenge and what those dollars led to, and they did both quantitative and qualitative research. They didn't use the exact same base that we did, but there's still some data that we can put together to leverage each other's data to be able to look at the impact in the research field. So I know there are other countries that have done impact studies, and we're certainly wanting to share that data and talk to other organizations that have done some sort of analysis in this way to see if we can, again, build on each other's strengths. So we're actually not going to do a Q&A specifically about the landscape project because we're going to do a little exercise about it. But I'd like you to take just maybe 2 minutes right now individually and write down your own thoughts and questions that came out of this presentation, and then we'll talk to each other about it. So just take 2 minutes to ask what your questions are, very similar to the questions that David posed to us.
Okay, I was walking around, there's some really rich conversations happening. So this is good, and I think there were some excellent questions. So let's go table by table and hear what your conversations were. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this is not just for this particular project, but later on we're going to talk about the knowledge management system, and we're going to try to go through similar exercises so that the Alliance starts to bring information that is of value to you. So Gorrit-Jan, I'm going to pick on your table first. Do you mind reporting out what your conversations were or questions that you wanted to still have answered?
Yes, we have a few ones. Was PLS, PSMA, PPB, BBP, and FTD taken into account? I said that's a question. I don't have the answer, I said.
Yeah, I don't have that answer either. So I would gather that they were part of it, but I'm not sure they were separate categories. Yep.
They were not,
Right.
Kathy. So the second thing is that it was interesting that if we look how this disease is, what is the cause, that there is not as much money spent, or no, that's not right, that there's not as much in PubMed about biomarkers. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have the right biomarkers, how can you see what happens? Third one was we need everybody to have like an open science, because if it's not an open science, we don't know what is going on in the world. And because we look in PubMed, we need open science. Then there was, Nick said, well, we have a lot of abstracts from the symposium, so why don't we run all the abstracts through the system to see what is going on right now? That was interesting. And the last one is, this is really a cure research or landscape. Of course, in the far future, we could also have a look at care, but maybe this assistive technology is not in there as much as we supposed it was to be, because it was really focusing on cure, maybe. Yep. Those are the things that we wanted to share.
Great, thank you. Those are all good comments. And I think in one of our conversations yesterday, we even recognized that maybe those who are doing work in assistive technology aren't publishing in the same way that some of these other papers are. And I think David kind of made that point earlier too. Good, thank you. Who's next? Sarah?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump right on that, because somebody at our table actually said, yes, the allied health professionals are up to here with the work that they're already doing, and don't have the time or resources to then publish. So the very positive things came out were that this does, well, it's kind of a positive, but really a negative. It shows the gaps of the research. And then there were some questions, like the adding the funding layer on top of it was very interesting to our table, because then they would be able to see, so say you have two organizations even in the same country, are they funding the same research separately?
Right.
So that would be a piece. And Then the next question would be how, if you were going to map other areas and you couldn't use PubMed, how would, what would that look like?
Right. Great questions. Thank you. Those are good things to add to the conversation. Kathy?
Just before we keep going, I want everyone to know that we are capturing all these questions
Great.
electronically. So we will be, it's not that we're going to answer the questions today, but it will guide us in what work we do further. So we are capturing everything as you're saying it.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. And Sarah, I couldn't agree more with you on the funding piece. As a funding organization, I'm always wondering, is somebody else funding that, or how many other people are funding the same study that we're being asked for dollars? So it's a huge question for me, for sure. Other tables, who else? Great.
So one of the questions we had was the data that we've been presented is coming up is 2 years. Mm-hmm. We would like to see it going back, and what's the trends from those, and does that vary over the coming years? Is there particular ones that are standing out within that as we get closer to this sort of time frame within that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Similar to the funding and that, what institutions are actually being funded and how much are they being funded, and is there a clear area that there's clusters of research going on somewhere, and does that mean that there's actually gaps elsewhere that we could be looking at? Yep. And the last question that we had there was the publications themselves. What is the level of the researchers? So is it professors, is it PhDs that are coming through, is it EHPs? And again, looking at that side of area.
It's a great one. Thank you. Good. Andrea?
So our table actually took this in a bit of a different direction, which I thought was interesting. The first question that came up had to do with whether or not there was another disease example that we could follow, another disease in which this had been done. So we'll leave that there. The second question that came up was how these results might influence collaboration between researchers and funders going forward, which is clearly going to be very important because we all are curious as to the next phase, which will help inform, and we're a funding organization as well. We're very interested in knowing where there may be areas of overlap and where there may be gaps. And a third question really is what I had just said. So it was kind of an interesting conversation.
Great. Thank you. Anyone? They passed that mic right over to you.
You know your friends are, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we had an interesting conversation, and I think it was about whether or not we can use learning from the research that's happened in the past to think about how we might go forward in the future. And one of the things I think we've got some agreement at least about is that we have a collective amount of money to spend on research, but we've never created a collective view about what those funding priorities should be. And several other diseases have done that, either on a European level or on an international level. And we've got such a mature community now. It seems to me we really ought to be at the point where we could start to do some of that. It might not influence 100% of my organisation's strategic investment, but it certainly should influence some. I'll leave it there.
That's good. Yeah. I think I don't want to speak for Culdip, who's our head of research here, but I think it would influence our organization as well. Not maybe 100%, but certainly influence it. So thank you. Next table. Who's got, David, I see you have a mic.
Yeah, sorry, everyone.
I don't know if you want to use it, but.
So our table, really, we're thinking the same thing. And
Okay.
in terms of how does this get utilized as a tool now to either collectively, and like Sally said as well, collectively or across a wide swath of people with different opinions and different wisdom,
Right.
say, look at this, tell me your thoughts on this, provide me the context of what your thoughts are so that you can thoughtfully think about where research funding should go in the future. So I think it's the question would be, how does the Alliance plan to use this as a tool for the next step and for providing that kind of a summit or an individualized aspect of how funding should go moving forward from a group of people.
Right. And I can only speak to a little bit of that question right now, but I think that will change. It will evolve as we find out more information. I was speaking to the back table and I said that I don't believe, and I think our board has discussed, it's not necessarily the job of the alliance to say what should or shouldn't happen, but I think our job is to pull together information and then push that information out so that people can make informed decisions, hopefully more informed decisions, or have understanding as we move forward. Could we do a summit in the future? I think that'd be a really nice thing to do in the next couple of years. No pressure, Kathy. But to bring together a knowledge collective to think about where our research maybe should go. Yeah, so, who knows? Andy?
We had a discussion that was very similar to others that they've already described, so I won't spend time on that, about where to direct funds.
Yep.
Although there was a specific observation that, for example, assistive devices don't have much publication, and
Right.
The need is fairly obvious, so maybe that's an example of a place that should get more funds. And then another point that was brought up is, what about stuff that's not in PubMed? And for a specific example, much of what will be presented here won't be in PubMed, maybe ever, or maybe not for another few years. So this is clearly an exercise that's sort of, chasing the wave or chasing the curve, but what else can you do?
Right. And I think that's a real question that we were trying to put our arms around when we started this, right? And we chose PubMed as one vehicle, recognizing there are many. And I think Sarah said that a lot of the data is behind a paywall. And so how do we actually try to get an even more comprehensive picture outside of PubMed? I think there are a lot of different vehicles. That's just one to start with. But yeah, that was one of our big challenges, is where to go as a depository of all of this information. So.
In the Latin American table, table.
You have a French co-op there.
Yes.
Who, by the way, I have to note, the French decided to do a food off. I mean, it's really good. it's too good, I have to point out. Anyway, Latin America.
No, the general comment is positive, because this landscape helped to understand possible source of future investment. And one of the comments was the question about if this analysis should be performed every year, for example, to understand the trend of some, for example, for assisted technologies or other issues. But there are two methodology questions that are probably the same of other comments. First of all, the source of information, because, for example, for assisted technology, is not so frequent that the studies are published in medical journal, and probably if you extend the analysis using other engine, you can increase the number of studies that are performed, not, for example, for medical purpose. And the other is the time of the analysis, because 1 year and a half
Right. No, it's
probably is not so complete to understand the real amount of work that are performed for some issues. So the proposal is very, very useful, and probably with these two improvement, we'll have a good source of idea to develop in our country.
Great, thank you. Yep, it's a start, but a lot more to do, a lot more. I think this is the last table, right?
Yes,
Tammy?
and actually,
They
our
took everything.
table had pretty much everything that we've heard already, were the comments from our table as well, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much. You can tell that this is a labor of love. I think we, as an organization, would like to continue forward. Your comments will be very helpful in how we will continue forward and those next steps. And we definitely recognized as the data started to come out and we started to try to navigate our objectives, some of the challenges we have, right? This might not be the right category for this medical journal. We might need other medical journals that actually help us. So this is a good start for us. And so I appreciate your feedback, and we will send out these slides. As we get more information, we will send that out to you as well as, and that's part of, I hope you see a value of the Alliance and your membership.